The dust did not settle after the hooves stopped. It hung in the air like the breath of ghosts, turning the world the color of old blood and fading sunsets. And in that choking stillness, the cowboy stood with his hands open, palms facing the 70 Apache warriors who had formed a living wall around his small homestead. Their horses shoulder to shoulder, eyes sharp, rifles steady, lances angled like the teeth of some ancient beast. And every instinct in him screamed that this was the end, yet something deeper, something quieter, refused to let his knees bend or his heart surrender. Because behind him, barely breathing on the packed earth near the gate, lay the wounded Apache woman whose blood had darkened the soil hours earlier when he found her collapsed. Near the dry arroyo, an arrow lodged cruelly beneath her ribs, her strength leaking away with every shallow breath. And he remembered how his hand had hesitated for only a moment before he pulled the arrow free, how she had bitten down on a strip of leather without a sound, eyes burning not with fear but with pride, and how in that moment he saw not an enemy, not a legend whispered around campfires, but a human soul clinging to life. And now that single act of mercy had brought 70 warriors to his gate. Warriors who did not come shouting or firing wildly, but came in terrifying silence. A silence that spoke of discipline, unity, and judgment, because the unthinkable had already happened before they arrived. Instead of killing him on sight for touching one of their own, they had dismounted, formed ranks, and waited, giving him the chance no white man was ever given, the chance to choose what kind of ending this story would have. And as the leader rode forward, his face weathered and unreadable, the cowboy felt his throat tighten, because he understood something that words could not explain, that this was not about land or war or revenge. This was about honor, and honor demanded a price. And when the chief's eyes moved from the cowboy to the wounded woman and back again, the weight of generations pressed down on that gaze, measuring the man not by his skin or his past, but by the truth in his actions. And when the chief spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying across the yard like a drumbeat, asking why the cowboy had helped her when every story said he should have left her to die. The cowboy swallowed and answered honestly, saying there was no why big enough to explain it, only that a life was a life. And he could not ride away while someone bled to death in the dust. Not if he wanted to keep calling himself a man. And the warriors shifted at that, not in anger but in surprise, because they had expected excuses or fear, not a simple truth laid bare. And then came the moment that would be remembered long after. Guns rusted and bones turned to dust, when the chief raised his hand and declared that the woman could not walk, could not ride on her own, and could not be carried fast enough to reach their people before death claimed her. And according to their law, the one who saved her must also be the one to ensure her survival. And that meant the cowboy must give what he valued most, what kept him alive in this harsh land, his only horse, the roan mare standing behind him with trusting eyes, the horse that had carried him through storms, through hunger, through loneliness, the horse that was more than an animal, more than property, but a partner, a witness to his entire life out here. And the unthinkable was not the demand itself, but the way the warriors waited, silent, respectful, giving him space to decide, because refusal would mean death, and acceptance would mean walking alone into a land that showed no mercy to those on foot. And the cowboy closed his eyes for a brief second, pressing his forehead against the mare's neck, breathing her familiar scent, feeling the warmth of her. And when he opened his eyes again, there were no tears, only resolve, and without ceremony, without begging, he untied the reins, placed them into the chief's hands, and nodded once, saying simply, "She'll need her more than I will." And for the first time, a murmur rippled through the 70 warriors, not of mockery, not of triumph, but of respect, because sacrifice spoken is one thing, sacrifice lived is another. And as the wounded woman was lifted carefully onto the horse, her eyes fluttered open just long enough to see the man who had saved her giving away his last hope of survival. And something ancient passed between them, something older than hatred, older than borders, And as the warriors turned and rode away, forming that same living wall around her, the chief paused and looked back, telling the cowboy that the land would remember this day, and that debts of honor are never forgotten among his people. And then they were gone, swallowed by dust and distance, leaving the cowboy standing alone, the gate creaking softly in the wind, the silence heavier than before, because now came the true test, the long walk into uncertainty. And as he took his first step away from the homestead, the sun dipping low and the world stretching endlessly before him, he did not know if he would survive the night, but he knew deep in his bones that he had done the one thing that mattered. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, 70 Apache warriors rode with a story that would be told for generations. A story of a cowboy who gave his only horse to save one wounded woman, changing the course of fate in a land shaped by blood. And if you want to know what that act of mercy awakened, if you want to witness how honor answered honor in ways no one expected, then make sure you subscribe to this channel, because Chapter 2 reveals how that single sacrifice returned to him multiplied, and how 70 warriors would later do something even more unthinkable, something that would shake the frontier forever. When the cowboy finally found strength enough to stand on his own 2 feet, days had passed, and the land around his homestead no longer felt empty, because even in the silence there was a presence, unseen yet steady, the kind that comes when a promise has been laid into the soil. And though the Apache warriors had ridden away again, they had not truly left. Their word traveled faster than horses, and soon traders, drifters, and even hardened outlaws began to speak his name with a different tone, lowering their voices as if the wind itself might be listening, saying this was the man protected by 70 riders, the man whose gate had once been surrounded not for death, but for judgment. And now, because of honor repaid, no one dared cross him. Yet protection was only one part of the unthinkable, because the wounded woman returned weeks later, riding the same horse he had given her, her strength restored, her posture proud. And when she dismounted before his gate, the cowboy felt time fold in on itself, because this was the life he had almost lost, standing before him alive because he had chosen mercy. And she spoke quietly, telling him that among her people, his story was now taught to children, not as a tale of a white man or an Apache, but as a lesson of what a true human being looks like when fear is stripped away. And she left him a bundle wrapped in worn leather, inside it a carved symbol of protection, a mark that meant wherever he walked, eyes would see him as one who had paid the highest price without being asked. And as seasons passed, the frontier changed around him. Violence flared and faded, but his land remained untouched, and more than once, shadows watching from the hills turned away, because 70 warriors had once done the unthinkable. They had chosen honor over blood and mercy over history, and that choice had created a legend stronger than fear, a legend that lived not in songs of war, but in quiet acts of respect. And the cowboy understood then that the greatest stories are not about who wins, but about who refuses to lose their humanity. And if you want more stories like this, where one choice reshapes destiny, subscribe to this channel, because legends are born when courage meets compassion. And this is only the beginning.